Hello, my name is Chris Cruz, and this is journal number 4, and today's topic is interpersonal communications. And basically, what that means is how we exchange person to person communication and how that builds relationships and a sense of meaning within each other. And by that, I mean that it can be verbal or nonverbal, and how we really stand out in every society. Um, and it comes from your own experience and how a culture is usually raised in terms of how they communicate with each other. Something that I really was really unexpectedly surprised is when, you know, within the chapter, sometimes certain cultures have certain standards, and some other cultures in other countries don't have those kind of standards. Um, so, for example, I don't really remember the exact example from the book, but I know that it was something between two countries about um, how being close to one another is not a sense of not understanding personal space, but it's a sense of just how they communicate and how they have a sense of understanding within each other because they're so close together physically that talking to one another is almost seen as secondhand nature, if that makes sense. But in the other's culture, being so close to one another is seen as almost rude, but also uncomfortable. So in the other eyes of the other country or in that culture, being close is a sense of normality, and for them to see that the other culture is uncomfortable, they assume that that person is just completely just shy and just flat out not really um, comfortable around other people. So, but in reality, I mean, the culture differences is what really set them apart when it came to their communication. Um, and I think that's really important because um, being verbal can only get you so far when it comes to nonverbal. So the way you show yourself, the tones, the gestures that you pull off throughout the conversations. And I want to go back to what I said at the beginning. The your first impressions really do matter when it comes to meeting new people. If you come out as someone who's very dull and very bland and not really persuasive when it comes to wanting to continue the conversation, people really would forget about you and really not really take you seriously. Um, but if you seem very fluid and very um, attentive when it comes to picking up certain topics within the conversation, people are really gonna want to build that communication, really support what you're saying more often. Just a little small things in what you do can really set you apart when it comes to those things, and that also is what you know really sets within the cultures is when when you're brought up in a certain way of communicating with one another, you really start to develop that kind of sense of confidence within yourself when it comes to talking to your own type of ways of communication. So overall, I think my most curious question is, after reading this chapter, how can we assume these assumptions of nonverbal and non and verbal ways of communication, and how does that really shape us, and how can that really succeed our everyday life in terms of communicating with one another, if that makes sense. um, and overall, I think that that is a good question to think about because um, lots of people have different assumptions on how they should communicate with one another, and other places are more biased on what they think is more right. But I kind of dragged it on at the end, but overall, I think this chapter was um interesting, and it really gives off a more detailed explanation about communication with one another. And yeah, so thank you.